Welcome, everybody. This is week 7 start sits on FTN's YouTube channel. I am your host, Jeremy Popielarz, who you can find on Twitter at PopesFFH. You can also find me here, all written content at FTN Fantasy Network. All right. So, week 7, exciting week. We got some buys. We got some big buys. Bills, Eagles, Vikings, not as important, but some bigger buys. We're going to have some probably tougher start sit questions this week. Obviously, we can find your rankings over at FTN Fantasy Network. If you're not a subscriber, use the promo code POPE, POPE, 20% off the subscription, gets you access to all the rankings, all the premium content that we have over there, help you make these decisions a little bit easier. If you're here, YouTube, drop any questions into the comments. If you're on Twitter, feel free to comment on there as well. I will try to keep up with the Twitter comments, but it's easier if you drop into YouTube, drop them there because we can actually pull them up on screen. So until then, we're going to wait for some questions. And obviously, until then, I guess I can kill some time talking about some players that FTN likes a little bit better than the ECR this week. One of those players I know for sure is definitely Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers is a guy that's going to face off against Chicago. Right now, Chicago hasn't been the easiest matchup for wide receivers. They actually have only allowed, let's see here, let's pull that up. They've only allowed one wide receiver 1 so far this season, no wide receiver 2s, and 2 wide receiver 3s. So Chicago's actually been a pretty tough matchup for wide receivers. But I do think that the Patriots and Jacoby Myers, just with his high target volume, is a good start this week, as well as a majority of our FTN rankers also agree with me there. We also have him a little bit higher. I think he's 5 spots higher than where the ECR is. I know we have him at wide receiver 21, I believe. Let me double check that so you guys know it for sure. Wide receiver 22 is where we have him at, which is a little bit higher, but not anything crazy. But he's definitely an interesting start. So the first question that we got today is from J Harv 62301. Good morning. How's it going? CMC or Damian Pearson have PPR? So here's where I stand on this. I mean, obviously CMC has gotten the nod that he's going to start. He's in a newer offense. But again, I feel like running backs making that transition isn't as hard as, say, a wide receiver or somebody like that. So for me, I'm still rolling CMC out there. Obviously, expectations should be slightly limited just because he is new. He's probably going to see a limited touch share. But I have him at 11. The rest of the crew, as our consensus, is at 13, where we have Damian Pierce at 15. So it's kind of like a pretty much a draw, really a coin flip there. But with CMC, it's a little bit easier of a matchup, as well as Damian Pierce going up against the Raiders. Raiders actually have been pretty stout against running backs. They've only had 3 top 24 finishes. So for me, I'm not totally in on Damian Pierce this week. I do think he's a good option, but I would probably still roll out CMC. The upside's a little bit higher there. I think that the 49ers kind of showcase what they got and what they brought in. So likely he scores a touchdown this week. So I'm definitely in on CMC still. Other than that, we have, like I said, let's go back quick. We'll roll back to Jacoby Myers. I think Jacoby Myers still is a good start for the wide receiver position. He's a little bit deeper, but obviously everybody knows to start your studs. So looking at somebody that's a little bit lower, that mid-level wide receiver to start. Let me pull up. Sorry. What am I looking for here? So outside of that, let's talk about the... Where should we go here? Let's go with quarterbacks real quick. So a guy that, we got another question, so we'll go there. Curtis Dowling. Good morning. Would you start Jeff Wilson? So Jeff Wilson obviously is linked with CMC and the 49ers. With me, the 49ers do have a pretty decent matchup. The Kansas City Chiefs have allowed, what do we got here, 9 top 36 running backs. So for me, I'm definitely still willing to roll out Jeff Wilson. Obviously, your expectations should be limited because CMC is obviously going to split those carries. But we've seen Shanahan kind of use a couple running backs at times. And I think until CMC really gets acclimated, most likely next week, you're going to see some Jeff Wilson, probably more than most of us would like, unless you obviously roster Jeff Wilson, in which at that point, Curtis, I think you have a good flex option. Obviously, it's kind of a little bit risky because CMC could just come in and just take complete control. But I do think Jeff Wilson sees enough usage to be a good flex option, probably that 10, 12 point range, unless he finds the end zone as well. I mean, he could easily do that. Like I said, the Chiefs are actually a very soft defense against running backs as far as PPR points go. So I'm in on Jeff Wilson still as a good start. And you're welcome, Curtis. Larry, should I start Gus Edwards or Kareem Hunt? All right, Larry. So I am going to go with Kareem Hunt here. Obviously, they're playing against each other. Baltimore's defense, not overly stout against the run. They've actually allowed a decent amount of more so wide receiver or running back 2s and 3s. So for me, that's where kind of Kareem Hunt falls into. I think that Nick Chubb obviously still sees his usage, but I think Kareem Hunt could get a little bit more run if the game ends up starting to get. We've seen some of these games between Cleveland and Baltimore get a little bit more high scoring than we would expect, and I think Kareem Hunt could be a benefactor there. So for me, I'm definitely starting Kareem Hunt over Gus Edwards just because Gus Edwards is coming off an ACL injury. We kind of saw how J.K. Dobbins has kind of has some lingering. It obviously was a little bit more impactful to more areas of his knee. So obviously Dobbins is a different story than Gus Edwards, but Edwards is still coming off an ACL as well. So for me, I think Justice Hill has shown a lot in Baltimore. I think that he's obviously active today. So he's going to see a good portion of that carry. He's looked very explosive. So, I mean, obviously he's coming off an injury, but prior to this injury, it was almost like we saw multiple 10-yard bursts from Justice Hill. So I think Justice Hill, Kenyan Drake, Mike Davis, Gus Edwards, I think you're going to see a real big cluster there with that. So, Larry, I'm kind of avoiding Gus Edwards this week, and I would lean towards Kareem Hunt, who I think situation's a little bit more streamlined for you. So I think Kareem Hunt's a better option there. We've got DYL 23, Pacheco, Mooney, or Pickens in a half PPR format. Okay, so this is going to be one of the first hard ones. So for me, I think Pacheco is interesting. Pacheco is going to start, but that doesn't mean that he's going to see a bulk load of the carries, in my opinion. We've seen it. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has started for a lot of these games, and he hasn't seen that bulk workload. So for me, I think that this doesn't really change a ton. I think Pacheco just sees a little bit more usage. I think that I have him and Clyde Edwards-Helaire basically back-to-back, like 29-30, right in that range of running backs. So for me, Pacheco is risky. Obviously, there's a huge upside there. If he comes in and he just explodes, like he's going to have a chance at a easily close to 20 points. So that's the issue with Pacheco, is that it's just very risky. Darnell Mooney is still very risky, as well as George Pickens. So for me, I'm going to play a little bit safer, and I'd probably roll with Pacheco just because I think he sees a little bit more volume. All these guys, Darnell Mooney, they are drawing Chicago has who? The Giants, I believe. Am I right there? I might not be right. Hold on for me. Who do they have? New England. Okay, yeah. So Darnell Mooney against New England is not a good situation for Darnell Mooney. The Patriots have actually not allowed a wide receiver 1 yet this season, so I'm really kind of out on Darnell Mooney. They have a couple wide receiver 2s and 3s that they've given up, but not a lot has funneled through New England. So for me, Darnell Mooney's kind of out. Pickens would be the only interesting one. Miami's a little bit softer. So it's between Pacheco and Pickens, and I'm going to lean Pacheco just because the offense is a little bit more explosive in Kansas City. Kyle's money. How we feel about Foreman and him versus Carter full PPR. I'm not sold on Deontay Foreman in this matchup against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has been very, very stout against running backs. They've only allowed, I think, 3 top 36 running backs. So for me, I am kind of out on Deontay Foreman unless I really had to. So I'm probably going to roll out Michael Carter here. I just think that he's obviously in a timeshare with Breece Hall, but we've seen Carter come in, vulture a couple touchdowns. I think his chances of having a bigger day are a little bit higher in a little bit of a softer matchup there. For me, Larry, thank you, and you're very welcome. So, TS, bench Sutton due to weather and quarterback. Dupes, Claypool, and Pierce are on waivers. Honestly, I would definitely probably bench Cortland Sutton. I know it sounds a little bit crazy out there, but for me, he's going up against the Jets. Obviously, I haven't really seen the weather issue. It doesn't really concern me too much. Brett Rippon does a little bit, but obviously Wilson's been pretty meh himself, so I'm not totally worried with the quarterback position. But what worries me is Sauce Gardner. Gardner's been really good against wide receivers, and I think that he shadows Cortland Sutton. I think that the Broncos are going to find their way through most likely Latavius Murray, as well as Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, those second-tier wide receivers, and possibly even Greg Dortch could have a pretty big day. I think that they're going to avoid Sauce Gardner because he's been pretty good. So for me, I'm going to actually roll with Pierce here. I like Alec Pierce. He's had back-to-back double-digit PPR points weeks in a row, and he has a little bit softer matchup against Tennessee in a game that we've seen those games get a little bit out of hand. It's a inter-division matchup there between Indy and Tennessee, so I like Alec Pierce. If you don't have to drop Sutton, I would definitely try and pick up Alec Pierce and start him over Cortland Sutton. Mr. Nice Guy, Zay Jones or Khalif Raymond. All my wide receivers are on a bye. I feel you. I have a couple places that's the same. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty tough week. Seven's got some pretty big names. So for me, I'm going to go with Zay Jones just because I feel like his role inside the Jacksonville offense is a little bit safer than what Khalif Raymond's is. Amon-Ra St. Brown should be back. They are missing Chark, but they also might be missing Reynolds, but that's all up in the air. And I feel like Khalif Raymond's more of a direct replacement for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think that St. Brown will see his share, and I think Khalif Raymond's kind of going to be in the backseat. So for me, I'm going to go with Zay Jones, who I think is possibly going to see the second target share there behind Christian Kirk, and possibly could even see more targets. Just depends on the day, I feel like, with that Jacksonville offense. So for me, I'm going to go Zay Jones there. Then we have Mike Evans or Jalen Waddle, PPR at my wide receiver 2 with Debo at 1. Flex is filled with Eckler. Will Waddle play? Unfortunately, I don't know any information there on Jalen Waddle as far as whether or not he's going to play. I do have the inactives pulled up here, and nothing has been released yet. Normally, we don't see that for probably another 10, 15 minutes. But from what I know, I believe that Waddle is expected to play. So for me, I am probably going to roll out Mike Evans, though, even though we're issuing with it there with Jalen Waddle. But I think Mike Evans has a better matchup against Carolina. I think that Tampa Bay, I think that they're going to come in, and Mike Evans is just a big touchdown guy. I think Brady's going to come out and kind of light up Carolina's defense, who's been actually pretty soft against wide receivers. They actually allowed 3 wide receiver 2s. They actually 3 wide receiver 1s, 3 wide receiver 2s, and 3 wide receiver 3s. So over the first 6 games. So that's a lot of production that's come through and funneled through the wide receiver position against Carolina. So for me, I'm going to go with Mike Evans. Let's see, who do we got here? George Z, Kareem Hunt, Travis Etienne, Deontay Foreman. Who would you start out of these 3? I lean Travis Etienne just because we have seen his usage and it's kind of fluctuated a little bit with James Robinson. But I do like the matchup that they have today. I think that Travis Etienne is going to actually see some touches. I mean, Deontay Foreman, I'm completely out on. It's not a guy that I'm really looking to start just because of the matchup against Tampa Bay I mentioned earlier. They've only allowed 3 top 36 running backs all season. So not really boding well for a guy that isn't overly great on an offense that likely struggles with PJ Walker at the helm. For me, so the only other issue would be Kareem Hunt, who I think could see a decent usage, especially in any type of PPR format, just because he's going to see a little bit more receiving work. But he's been pretty meh the last couple of weeks. Nick Chubb's kind of taken over that role, at least that whole backfield. So for me, I'm going to go with Etienne. I just think that there's a better chance that he has a bigger game than Kareem Hunt would be. We have Kyle Finstrom. Where's Finstrom? Okay. Yeah, still Mike Evans, Finn, no matter what, even if it's 10-man. I would definitely still flex Eckler over Waddle for me. Let's see here. Kyle MK. I am in a bind this week at running back, and I'm forced to start 2 of Jeff Wilson, Herbert, Rashad White. All 3 are meh. Not going to argue that one. But is there 2 you'd give an edge in terms of upside? Worth mentioning that Chuba Hubbard and Caleb Huntley are available as free agency options as well. All right, so when we look at this, Caleb Huntley, let's start with him real quick. So Caleb Huntley has been very touchdown dependent in his limited usage in Atlanta. And actually his average, I know he gets ranked a lot higher, but his average finish I have here over this first portion of the weeks that he's actually played, and he's right around the 50s. He's not actually been anything very useful. He's been an average of 53. He's had a top 24 and a top 36 finish, basically mostly because he scored a touchdown. And for me, that offense isn't overly productive. I know they're doing decently, but it's just a kind of a luck of a draw. So for me, Caleb Huntley, I'm not going to be looking to add, but I would definitely start Jeff Wilson here. I think Jeff Wilson still has a decent role this week. Just because CMC is still new, he's going to be on somewhat of a pitch count. I think there's a chance that he's at least a top 36 option, which isn't great, but in this bind that you have here, I still like him. And I'd probably go Khalil Herbert just because the Bears have mentioned throughout the week that they're going to play the hot hand, and Khalil Herbert could be that, and he could see a majority of the touches for the Bears there. So I'd go with those 2. They just feel a little bit safer. Rashad White could easily have 0 touches, and he hasn't had a huge upside yet. He had that one big game that not even big, but he had one better game where he scored a touchdown. But outside of that, he's only been a couple points here or there in PPR formats. So I would probably just roll out Jeff Wilson and Khalil Herbert. Chuba Hubbard might be interesting to add if you have a spot to just kind of stash him for next week, because we'll see exactly what that Carolina backfield is, whether it's going to be Deontay, Foreman, or if Chuba Hubbard can kind of carve out a bigger role over Foreman. So for me, I would be interested in stashing Hubbard, but I'm not looking to start him this week, Kyle. All right. Lee, Justice Hill have any value rest of season? Yeah, I think so. I actually picked him up anywhere I could this week, just because, at least for this week, honestly, this week, next couple weeks, I feel like Justice Hill has a chance to be the guy. We're going to have to see what Gus Edwards looks like. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins is down for 4 to 6 weeks, which kind of puts you mostly near the end of the fantasy season. He could come in a little bit later and possibly be viable in the playoffs, just because the matchups are a little bit softer for the Ravens down that stretch. But the issue is just going to come down to is how this usage breaks down. And Justice Hill was actually really good before Dobbins came back. And even when Dobbins came back in that matchup, he had some pretty big runs. He's looked pretty explosive. So obviously it's going to depend on how this injury affects him. But I think Justice Hill is going to be an interesting option. I think that Drake kind of falls off. Drake's production last week was just a benefactor of not having enough guys active, and Dobbins went down. So for me, I'm not super in on Kenyan Drake. So I would prefer Justice Hill over Kenyan Drake in that situation. So I feel like it's going to be Edwards and Hill back and forth there. So I really do like Justice Hill for the rest of the season, Lee. So if you have a spot, I would definitely add him. Do have some questions we can just kind of go over here on Twitter. We have one on here that's McCaffrey over Drake. And I'm going to obviously start McCaffrey in that situation. I think that Christian McCaffrey, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be somewhat limited. But I do think that he finds the end zone. I think San Francisco still kind of wants to show off. I mean, they paid a pretty penny to get Christian McCaffrey over here into the 49ers offense. So for me, I still think limited, but McCaffrey's good enough that even on limited touches, he's going to have a productive week, most likely an RB2, high-end RB2 possibly, if he goes out there and looks like he can handle that workload. They might give it a little bit more to him and less to Jeff Wilson. So, although Wilson will likely be improved. Curtis, we got Taquan Thornton or Alec Pierce or DJ Moore, half PPR. Curtis, I'm going to roll out Alec Pierce. I'd mentioned it earlier. He gets a pretty good matchup against Tennessee this week. And for me, Tennessee's been a little bit weak against wide receivers, as well as it's just a matchup that kind of tends to be fairly high scoring. It seems like these matchups tend to kind of run away from both these teams. And like I said, Tennessee's given up 3 wide receiver 1s, 4 wide receiver 3s, and 1 wide receiver 2 in the 6 weeks thus far. So for me, there's a lot of points that look like they funnel through the wide receivers. So for me, I'm definitely in on Alec Pierce this week, who's also seen back-to-back double-digit PPR weeks. So obviously half PPR, he might be a little bit down from that, but still productive. So I'm in on Pierce. Taquan Thornton's interesting. I'm not ready to throw him into this top mold just because he kind of scored a lot of points, but it was on very limited touches. So for me, I'm still iffy. I want to see exactly how he gets used. I know how Alec Pierce is going to be used. And DJ Moore is just sadly kind of unstartable at this moment, just until we really see. I mean, he's going to see a little bit more influx in targets now with Robbie Anderson not there, but still not an offense that I'm overly looking to start. So DJ Moore for me is still going to sit on the bench. The Dark Knight, we have Pacheco, Latavius Murray, and Justice Hill. Need to rough week. So for me, that is a little bit tough. I like Justice Hill. I think that he could see more usage than we're expecting. He was seeing a good share prior to the J.K. Dobbins return and then obviously his injury. So I think Justice Hill could see a little bit more usage than we think. And I'm not sold on Kenyan Drake. They kind of had to use him last week just because of injuries. And I think Gus Edwards gets eased in. So I think Justice Hill has a good chance to lead this backfield, although that's not going to say much because it could still be a 3-headed monster that kind of makes it messy. But for me, Latavius Murray's in that same situation. You got Mike Boone and Melvin Gordon. I know Gordon and Boone barely saw any touches last week, but they're also facing a pretty good Jets defense. So I'm not really on Latavius either. So for me, I would kind of go with Pacheco, who I think it's a little bit tougher matchup against San Francisco, but it is the Chiefs, and they always find a way to score a lot of points and produce fantasy production. So for me, I'm rolling with Pacheco and Hill here, just shooting a little bit higher on the upside with Hill than Latavius. So it is rough. All three are honestly very tough to decide between, and they're very likely boom or bust. You're either going to get a good week or it's probably going to be meh. So for me, I think Pacheco and Hill have the highest upside there, so I'm going to shoot with those two. George, I picked up Claypool this week as a drop for Khalil Herbert. Is there any value, and would you start him over Brandon Cooks? So for Claypool, I'd probably start Brandon Cooks over Claypool. I do like Claypool. I think that he's not a bad option, but he's also not great. I feel like Kenny Pickett at quarterback kind of leans a little bit more on George Pickens than Claypool, and they kind of have a similar role. Not exactly the same, but they are kind of similar, a little bit more deep threats, kind of jump ball-y type roles. So for me, I'm still starting Brandon Cooks, but I would hold Claypool. But I almost would rather have Khalil Herbert than Claypool. I don't know exactly how deep that league is. I think that Herbert might have a little bit better value than Claypool long-term the rest of the season. Curtis has another one. Chase Edmonds on the bench. Is he droppable? I'm not going to drop Chase Edmonds in large part because we've seen Raheem Mostert struggle to stay healthy. Obviously, injuries are unable to predict it. It's not, you can argue that somebody's injury prone, that they miss games every year, but the running back position is so physical that every running back has the equal opportunity to get injured. So for me, I'm going to hold Chase Edmonds because I still think there could be some value. The other question would be is who are you trying to pick up? I mean, it depends on who you're adding. Like if there's a really good ad on the waiver wire, probably I'd drop them depending on who you're adding. You know what I mean? So, but if you're adding them for just a random dart throw, I'd rather hold on to Chase Edmonds, who I think is a more talented option probably than like a Latavius Murray or Justice Hill, somebody like that. I mean, I'm probably holding Edmonds. I think just kind of give him a week or two to see exactly how this continues to play out. But although it does look like Raheem Mostert's taken over that backfield. And no problem, Dark Knight, anytime. All right, it seems like that's those. Let's check back on Twitter here, see if we got any other questions. We got Dark Knight has another question. Stash Deshaun Watson. No. I actually did this in one of my redraft leagues that I feel like I could waste the bench spot. Because obviously he's not going to be able to do anything for you still for a couple weeks, but you're getting ahead of the curve. If he's out on the waiver wire and you have a pretty decent team that's not going to have an issue in bye weeks aside from injuries, I'd add him. I think that he's a good option, especially if you're playing in a super flex league, just because even when he comes back, yeah, he might not be what we remember Deshaun Watson being as a fantasy asset, but he is still going to be a quarterback too on a weekly level with QB top 5 upside. That offense has been pretty good without him. They've got weapons that are underrated. I think, you still have Amari Cooper there, who's obviously a decent wide receiver. Donovan Peoples-Jones has been targeted a lot. He's a good receiver. You also have, obviously, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, David Njoku. Like, there's a lot of firepower in that offense for Deshaun Watson once he gets back. So, for me, I'm in on holding him, but obviously only if you're in that position that you're able to do it. You don't want to like hinder yourself and drop somebody that you're looking to start on a weekly basis or could be starting in a flex position for a guy that's honestly not going to be playing until almost week 12, week 13. So it's a little early, but I've done it in some spots. So like I said, roster dependent, I would definitely entertain that option. So we've got some here, running back flex, super flex 3 from Gary Roberts on Twitter, pick 3, Pierce, Brian Robinson, Mostert, Drake, Deontay Johnson, Melvin Gordon. And we have, I would probably roll out Pierce. I'm going to go Pierce, Robinson, and Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson would probably be my options here. I like Dameon Pierce against the Vegas. It's the Raiders. It's not the best matchup, but it's also not a terrible matchup. I think he's easily a high-end RB2. Also, Brian Robinson is actually in a pretty plus matchup against the Packers. The Packers have actually been pretty easy against running backs. So I think he's got basically a pretty safe floor of an RB2. They've been, like I said, the Packers have given up a ton of points to running backs. So I like Brian Robinson in that situation. And then Deontay Johnson, I just think sees enough targets in Pittsburgh's offense to be somewhatly safe, as well as he has just such a high upside. If Deontay Johnson finds the end zone or has a big play here or there, there's just so much upside there built into it. Where Drake seems a little bit meh, especially with that cluster of what's going to go on with those running backs. Melvin Gordon is almost unstartable to me at this point. And Raheem Mostert would be the only one that's interesting just because he's in another plus matchup. So I'm not sold, but I would definitely probably roll Pierce, Robinson, and DJ there, Gary. If you happen to be tuning in on Twitter, those would be the guys that I would roll with. So there you go. Lee's got another one. Wait on Dion Jackson and Akers or drop. So Dion Jackson to me is a guy that's definitely droppable. He's only viable for me without Hines and without JT. I think Dion Jackson could see some touches, but not enough to really be fantasy relevant. You'd be hoping for a touchdown here or there. So Lee, I think Jackson is definitely a drop. Cam Akers, though, you're definitely holding. Yeah, he's not going to play for the Rams at the moment, but there's definitely a chance he gets moved before the deadline, and then we could see a whole different situation. He lands in Denver or something like that. Then Akers is definitely a viable fantasy option. So I'm holding on Cam Akers. Dion Jackson, if you have a decent waiver wire option to add, I would drop Jackson. And the Dark Knight, you are welcome. Chris Smith, 2 wide receivers to start: Hunter Renfrow, Cortland Sutton, Cooks, London, or McLaurin. So, still don't have any inactives, but they should be coming out fairly soon. So the only issue there would be for Renfrow. I don't know exactly if he's playing. If Renfrow plays, I would start him, especially with Waller already out. But obviously he might not play. For me, it's going to probably be Renfrow and Cooks. Brandon Cooks is actually ranked for us. Our consensus on Brandon Cooks is pretty high. I mean, he's at 25. It's really a toss-up between Cooks and London. I think it depends on how you envision both these games going. Obviously, London is up against the Bengals, which could be a little bit more high scoring because Atlanta's defense is not great. So London could see a lot of volume. So for me, I would definitely start Renfrow. If Renfrow's inactive, it's Cooks and London. And then up to you on who you want to decide between Cooks and London. McLaurin, I'm out on for sure. He's likely to draw Jair Alexander. And that's not anything that I want to dance with. So I'm not into that. And Sutton's likely got Sauce Gardner, another one that I'm not really looking to start, especially with both these guys seeing backup quarterbacks. So Renfro's a plug-in. If he's not starting, go Cooks and London, and then your choice on who you like better between Cooks and London for me. At your running back position, 2 running backs to start: CMC, Drake, or Breece Hall. CMC and Hall. Kenyan Drake's big game last week. I know a lot of people are probably in on him in large part due to that, but that was like the perfect storm. They had him and Dobbins both active. Dobbins' knee tightened up, obviously needs surgery now again to alleviate that pain. But with that became a lot of touches for Kenyan Drake. That's not what he's going to see this week. Justice Hill likely active. Gus Edwards likely active. So you're going to see 3 to 4 guys that are going to be pretty involved. So for me, Drake is just too risky. CMC to me is going to see enough touches to be 10, 15 points just because he's so explosive. That's a solid flex play, even if he doesn't turn out to be a high-end wide running back. And Breece Hall's a must start moving forward. Breece Hall's the guy in New York as of right now. He's seeing a majority of the touches, and he's being productive. I mean, Breece Hall's current average finish throughout the season is the 14th running back, 14.33, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is 6th or is 5th amongst all running backs, is the average position of 14.33. He is only 5 points behind Austin Eckler, who is first, who averages the average position of 9. And then you have Barkley at 9.6, McCaffrey at 9.8, or Nick Chubb at 12.1. And Hall is 14.33. So he's in that same category right now. So for me, Breece Hall, always a start. CMC, always a start. I'm not messing with Kenyan Drake this week. Justin, half PPR flex position, start Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, Tyler Lockett, MVS, and Claypool. Okay, so we're picking one. Gordon and Murray, I'm probably avoiding. The Jets haven't been overly friendly to running backs. They currently have only allowed one running back one. They've given up a decent amount to 2s and 3s, so not overly great. But I just don't know how well that offense is going to run. We even saw it last week. Gordon just didn't get any touches, and that could be the same scenario again. Latavius Murray was not overly productive with his amount of usage. For me, I'm probably starting Tyler Lockett here. Lockett, for me, is pretty high in my rankings this week. It's actually ranked at 11th, and we at FTN have him at 12 in our consensus amongst all the other rankers. So for me, Tyler Lockett is a start over these guys. We got Killa PvP, start 2 out of Waddle, Higgins, and Amon-Ra, full PPR. Thanks in advance. You are welcome in advance. Second, I'm going to roll. Amon-Ra feels like a must start for me. He's within my top 10. He's also within the top 10 as FTN's consensus. So Amon-Ra is going to see a good usage, especially without DJ Chark, without Swift. I know it's Dallas's defense, but they've actually given up a lot of points to wide receivers. Dallas has allowed 2 wide receiver 1s, 3 wide receiver 2s, and 1 wide receiver 3, and then 3 wide receiver 4s. So there's a lot of points that actually can be scored on Dallas as long as the offensive line can hold up, and the Lions have a very good offensive line. So for me, Amon-Ra is going to see a lot of usage, so he's a must start in that situation. And then I'm probably going to roll. It's tough because Higgins is kind of coming off an injury, but I'm probably going Higgins just because it's an easier matchup. And Waddle's more injury concerned this week than Higgins was. So for me, it's probably going to be Higgins and Amon-Ra. Chris, you are welcome. So let's roll back to Twitter. We'll check on our comments in there. We've got Noobs on Twitter at WAWareFresher. Kareem Hunt or Jamal Williams. Also have Curtis Samuel and Tyler Lockett in my flex right now. Should I switch one out for Alec Pierce? Noobs, I would go Jamal Williams, especially with the words that Swift may not be playing. Obviously, the inactives we should be seeing soon. But yeah, I would definitely roll Jamal Williams. And then I would almost switch out Curtis Samuel for Alec Pierce. A little risky, but I do like the potential there. Like I mentioned earlier, Alec Pierce has had back-to-back double-digit PPR points, as well as he's a soft matchup against Tennessee. So for me, that's where I would go. So yeah, I would go Pierce and Lockett in your flex, and then I would go Jamal Williams over Kareem Hunt. So that's where I am with that one. And that's what I have in my lineup, like as well right now. Good luck later. Thank you, and thanks for tuning in, and hopefully it's good luck. I have some pretty dismal starting lineups, as probably the rest of us do, with the kind of mini buy apocalypse here that's going on. Week 7 is pretty tough with what we got there. Let's see what else we got on Twitter here. We got answered that one. We got CMC, or I'm guessing Jamal Williams from Schwarley C. I'm going to say CMC here. I know he's going to be somewhatly limited, but Jamal Williams is drawing Dallas. I know it's a good offensive line, but Dallas's defense is still pretty stout against running backs. And I think CMC still sees enough. Likely he falls in the end zone at least once tonight. So I'm still in on CMC, even in limited touches, just because he's so viable and productive, even on those limited touches that we've seen in the past. So Lee's got Christian Kirk or Jacoby Myers, half PPR. This one's a little bit tougher for me. I had mentioned Jacoby Myers earlier. We have Jacoby Myers ranked a little bit higher than the consensus. For me, I have him significantly higher than Christian Kirk. So I'm saying Jacoby Myers. However, if you look on FTN's rankings, Christian Kirk is actually one spot ahead of Jacoby Myers. So if you want to use the consensus, they're saying Christian Kirk at FTN. For me personally, I am saying Jacoby Myers. I think that he sees enough volume, even though it's a tough matchup, to be productive. Justin, who wins the trade, Lamar and Walker for Brady and Henry? We're never really FTN. We're always pretty, there's no win. As long as it helps your team, it helps. But I do prefer the Lamar and Walker side personally. I think that both of those guys are going to be primed for a pretty good stretch run. Brady worries me, that offensive line. I mean, he's had some blow-up weeks, but he's also had some very big duds. And Henry's been Henry, but I'd rather have The drop from Henry to Walker is definitely less for me than Lamar to Brady personally. So I like the Lamar and Walker side. Let's bounce over to Twitter. We got a half PPR spot from Kanoto Plankin. Pick one flex running back spot. So we got Renfro, Moore, Gordon, Robinson, and Pacheco. Flex, I'm going to go Renfro if he's definitely active. And then the running back, I'm going to go Pacheco here. I'm going to shoot the upside. I think that Pacheco is obviously kind of drawn enough attention to be a starter, quote unquote, for the Chiefs this week. So I'm going to go with him over James Robinson, who's kind of been trending the opposite direction. So it's riskier, but I think that there's definitely a higher upside and a better offense there. So we got here, Wyneek. Do I start Jamal Williams or Kenyan Drake? Jamal Williams. Drake's been a big topic this morning, at least here in these questions. But Kenyan Drake's last week's explosion was kind of more of a perfect storm, just because it was mostly him and Dobbins that were active that were going to run the ball for the Ravens last week. And Dobbins' knee tightening up allowed Drake to see a large target share. So for me, Drake's not going to see that with now Gus Edwards being active and Justice Hill likely active. It's going to be kind of a three-headed monster. So Drake, to me, is not talented enough to kind of win that out. Justice Hill looked better than Drake already earlier in the season. And Gus Edwards is a very good running back as long as that ACL injury doesn't hinder him too much so far. I think he even sees possibly more touches than Drake. So Jamal Williams is safe. I don't know if it's 100% sure, but I know Swift was leaning towards not playing today, which means that Jamal Williams is going to see that bulk load of carries. I know it's a tough matchup. Swift is out, so we do have the inactives. I have him here. So for me, Mike Davis is the only running back not active for the Ravens, and Swift out for Detroit is a huge deal. So for me, I'm going to go Jamal Williams. Chris Smith. Oh, I forgot. Would you play Alec Pierce over Cooks in London? That one is a little bit tougher. So probably not. I do have London higher. I would maybe play him over Cooks, but not London. So that's where I would sit with that. Sutton, Deontay from SH7. Sutton, Deontay, Gallup, or Alec Pierce in my flex full PPR. So I'm extremely down on Cortland Sutton this week. That's not the case at FTN. Our consensus actually has Sutton as a wide receiver 20 this week. I have him at 30. I think that Sutton is going to draw Jair Alexander paired with Brett Rippon and an offense that's just not overly great. I'm not really sold on Cortland Sutton this week. So I actually prefer in this situation. I like Alec Pierce, but I'd probably go Deontay Johnson. I just think the volume's going to be there for him. Gallup's interesting. I'm just not sure how healthy Dak's thumb is. I know that Detroit's been pretty easy as far as giving up points to wide receivers and quarterbacks. So Gallup is definitely an interesting option. But I'm going to leave Deontay just because I think that the quarterback situation is a little bit cleaner. Dak's obviously better than Pickett, but coming off that thumb injury, I'm still a little worried that we could just see a lot of Zeke and Tony Pollard because Detroit's also been very bad at stopping the run. And if that game gets out of hand, I could see them just easily handing it off to Zeke a lot. So that's why I'd go DJ. Coulter Nunn, Amari Cooper, or Dameon Pierce at flex. I'm going to go Dameon Pierce. Me and the FTN consensus is definitely high on Dameon Pierce. A high-end RB2. I have him as my RB15. The consensus is at 15 as well at FTN. I don't love the matchup. The Raiders haven't been overly easy on running backs, but I like that a little bit better than Cooper because the Ravens have given up a lot to wide receivers, but they've also gotten a little bit stouter the last couple of weeks. So for me, I'm going to go with Dameon Pierce, more likely to score a touchdown there for you. Flex Brian Robinson versus Green Bay or Josh Reynolds against Dallas. I did have the inactives. Let's pull them up. Reynolds is definitely playing. I'm going to still go Brian Robinson. Green Bay's been actually very easy against running backs. They have allowed 5 running back 2s this season, and 2 RB1s. So it's 7 inside the top 24 in just 6 weeks. So for me, Brian Robinson, I think definitely has a good shot at a big game. Josh Reynolds obviously could against Dallas, who's a little bit softer. But with Amon-Ra St. Brown there, Hawkinson, I think that Reynolds kind of goes a little bit to the wayside, doesn't see a ton of targets. He'll still see some, but I think Robinson has a bigger chance at seeing a bigger game. Amon-Ra or Dameon Pierce full PPR. I'm going to go Amon-Ra with him being back. Dallas has been pretty light against wide receivers. The big thing there is the pass rush, but the Lions' offensive line's pretty good. So I'm going to go with Amon-Ra here. We have him ranked inside the top 10 for our wide receiver positions at FTN in the consensus, and I have him even higher at 8. So I'm in on Amon-Ra there for Stacy. Jimmy Cassidy, Kenyan Drake or Pacheco. Drake's been a hot topic. Pacheco as well. I'm actually going to go with Pacheco here. Better offense. He's trending in the upward direction where I feel like Drake's kind of going down. I know he came off that big week, but I mentioned earlier, it's more so a perfect storm for Drake just because it was only him and Dobbins active last week, where then Dobbins' knee tightened up and he kind of saw a full workload. He's not going to see that this week with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill both active. So Pacheco for me has a better chance, I think, at seeing more work just because he's on that upward trend. You know what I mean? He saw first team reps. He was declared the starter this week. So he's trending up. So I feel like he's got a better chance at seeing more touches, Jimmy, than Kenyan Drake does. So I'm going to go with Pacheco there. Wyneek also need a quarterback. I have Matt Ryan starting now, but quarterbacks sitting in free agency are Jimmy G, Zach Wilson, Pickett, Tannehill, Brissett, Heineke, and Mills. I actually like Matt Ryan this week. We saw Matt Ryan put up 17 fantasy points against this Titans defense just a few weeks ago. So for me, I actually have Matt Ryan ranked at my 12th quarterback. And FTN, we have him at 15. The only guy that we do have ahead of him on your list here would be Jimmy G. If you really wanted to go get him, we have Jimmy G at 12. I mean, you're talking a couple spots. We're talking minuscule points here, 1 to 2 points in between them in that type of ranking situation there. It's a little bit softer matchup, but it's not even softer because it's the Chiefs. Like, he's probably going to throw a decent amount. But like I said, Matt Ryan's coming off, I think he finished, QB2 this last week? So for me, Matt Ryan is a little bit on that uptrend. It seems like that offense has kind of turned a corner a little bit. So for me, I'm in on Matt Ryan. I think he could easily get you 17 points again, which is pretty good out of a quarterback position. It's a low QB1, high QB2. So I'm in on that. Pickett, I'm not so much in on. Zach Wilson, I want nothing to do with because Denver's the best against quarterbacks. Last week they held, Herbert to 9 points. So Zach Wilson isn't overly attractive to me. Tannehill would be interesting, but you're kind of got the same situation. Matt Ryan and Tannehill seem like a even swap, so I wouldn't be looking to make that move. Brissett's meh. Again, kind of seems even with Matt Ryan. So Heineke and Mills, I'm not overly excited with either. So I'd probably stay with Matt Ryan. You're welcome, Coulter. We got Edward Zhang. Trade Kelsey and Ramondre for JT Brees and Njoku, 12-man full PPR. Edward, if you're still in here, is it redraft? I'm assuming it's redraft. If it's not, do you want to let me know it's Dynasty? I'll give you a minute to type that up just because that really definitely matters. And I guess it depends on your team. You're obviously Kelsey's kind of the top 2 at tight end between him and Andrews. They've kind of been the most consistent. Ramondre is obviously good, but he's not going to see the same. Okay, so it is redraft. Ramondre is going to see less usage with Harris active. So for me, if you really need running backs, Brees is a top 12 running back going forward. JT is obviously a top 12 running back going forward as long as he's healthy. The only issue is you're definitely losing out at the tight end position, which is tough because these guys have been so vital. Like Njoku has a big week, then he has a minuscule week, and then he's got a big week, and then it's kind of like that for all the wide or tight ends outside of Kelsey and Andrews and Ertz. So if you need running backs, I would definitely make the move. It's just tough giving up Kelsey, to be honest. Njoku's a good option, and I think he gets even more attractive once Watson comes back. But it's tough because if you're going to start JT and Brees every week, sure. I mean, you're getting a lot of points there. But yeah, I mean, I'd probably do it. I think you're getting a lot of points from JT and Brees. You just you got Pierce as well. Yeah, I see. So you're starting Dubes in your flex, so you really don't have a lot of depth outside of these guys. So you're adding a little bit more depth with JT and Brees because you can start Pierce, JT, and then Brees in the flex with going to Njoku. Yeah, I don't mind it. I would do it. I think it seems like it helps your roster a little bit. Definitely getting a fall off there from Kelsey to Njoku, but adding JT and Brees is a pretty good return for Kelsey. So I would do it. Should I drop Pickens or Dubes for Schultz? I have Pitts. Mark, I would say no. I think that better days are ahead for both of these wide receivers. Kyle Pitts as well. Pitts is meh, but I don't know if you have anybody else that's possible to drop. Or I guess who else do you have at wide receiver? Like, does Pickens and Dubes ever start for you? Do you feel comfortable ever starting them? Obviously, if they produce at a high rate, you're going to start them. But at the moment, if you have other guys that Dubes and Pickens sit on your bench, I would pick whichever one you like better. Personally, for me, I think that Dubes has a better route to more production than Pickens does, but Pickens is obviously better than Dubes. But I think Dubes has a better route to production, so I'd probably drop maybe Pickens for Schultz. But like, I don't love it. I'd rather just kind of roll with Kyle Pitts because like Dalton Schultz hasn't been that much better than Kyle Pitts this season, so I would just kind of roll out with Pitts. But if you really wanted to, it just kind of seems like a pointless move, just because Pitts to me is equal to Schultz. So I'd probably sit because I think Pickens and Dubes have a higher upside long term. Alex, Geno Smith or Trevor Lawrence? For me, a little bit tougher. I actually have Geno Smith ranked higher this week, as well as the consensus at FTN does as well. They have him at 9. Lawrence is at 13. I have Lawrence at 14. So for me, I'm going to go Geno Smith. I think that he's proven enough to be considered that guy that's a easily plug in and start kind of guy. So for me, that's where I'm going. I'm going Smith over Lawrence. Let's see here. Wyneek, is Andrews active? Let's check. He is, in fact, active. The only inactives for Baltimore is Armour Davis at corner, Cleveland at guard, Davis at running back, and Tylan Wallace at wide receiver, and A.J. Klein at linebacker. So Mark Andrews is active today. Definitely a guy I'd probably start. I know he's had some injuries bouncing in and out there, but too good to not start, in my opinion. Phil, Mike, Bateman, Pickens, Hunt. Starting Deontay in Miami's D, half PPR. If you're starting the Miami D, I would probably not start Pickens. And obviously you're starting Deontay, so you're kind of capping yourself a little bit there, playing each other, both on the same starting roster. I'd probably lean Bateman. He is active. So with that assumption is that I'm assuming that they cleared him to be a full go, which means he's likely to see a decent amount of work. He's shown in the beginning of the season a high touchdown upside. He kind of works that little bit deeper part of the portion of the field, so it doesn't take as many plays for him to give you a big week. So I would go Bateman there. Start one from Andre, CMC or Ramondre Stevenson, half PPR. I'm going to go CMC. Damian Harris is back active. So Stevenson's obviously going to see a little bit more limited. There's going to be enough volume for both of them. I actually have them both ranked as top 24 options, as well as FTN's consensus does as well. But I think CMC still has more upside. I think that he could come in and get a little bit more work than we think that he's going to get. So I'm going to go CMC there. Pacheco or Gus Edwards rest of the season. That's really tough. I'd probably go Pacheco. It seems like his trajectory's upward a little bit more. He's kind of just beating guys out. There's no injury issues there. Like, he's just been flat out better than CEH and Jerick McKinnon to earn this kind of role. So where Gus Edwards, you're kind of relying on some injuries. Gus is also coming off an ACL. Justice Hill's looked pretty good. Drake's done okay when he's been asked. Dobbins is lingering. Obviously, with the IR, he's going to be out for a couple more weeks. But especially with the complications of Dobbins' ACL, it's likely Gus Edwards may have some as well. Likely they have the same surgeon being with the same team. So I would take Pacheco here. Shooting more upside. I think he has a higher upside. Chiefs offense a little bit more explosive than the Ravens. So that's where I would be there. Let's see here. Let's roll over to Twitter. We got a Brandon Cooks or Josh Reynolds from Anachoau. I'm going to go Brandon Cooks. I know that Reynolds is going to see a little bit more usage without DJ Chark, but Brandon Cooks is the guy there in Houston. And they're playing the Raiders, not overly stout against wide receivers. They haven't been super easy, but they're not also the toughest matchup. So for me, I'm going to go with Brandon Cooks because the Raiders have allowed 7 top 36 options, mostly wide receiver 2s. But that's kind of where you're at there with Cooks and Reynolds as a wide receiver 2. Full point PPR from Brandon McChrystal on Twitter. That would be Najee or Ramondre. I am going to go Najee here. I've been a little bit of a Najee hater most of the season, but I think Najee is a safer RB2 play. Ramondre's obviously got that upside. We have him ranked there as well. But they're all within each other, a couple points away from each. So for me, I'm going to roll with Najee here just because I think he has a little bit clearer role and a little bit softer matchup there. So that's where I am. Brandon would be Najee. Phil, you are welcome. Let's see what else we got here. Anybody? Let's see. Hard to pull up the Twitter questions because it doesn't let us anymore. Let's see. Thanks. What we got here? So we got Westy1121 on Twitter. Wide receiver 3 had some buys and some injuries. Alec Pierce, Zach, I'm guessing that's supposed to be Zay Jones, and George Pickens. So for me, it's been Alec Pierce. I've been kind of touting him most of this morning. Alec Pierce against Tennessee is a softer matchup. Alec Pierce has had back-to-back double-digit PPR point weeks. So whether it's PPR or half PPR, both is a definite bonus. So for me, I'm going to go Alec Pierce. I just think that he's a little bit safer, has a pretty equal upside to me as George Pickens and or Zay Jones personally. So I'm definitely going Alec Pierce here, Westy. So that's where I would roll. Let's see here. Got another question here from Lee on YouTube. We have flex half PPR is my assumption. Brandon Cooks or Damian Harris. Let's see. So Harris has Chicago. Not overly the best matchup, but not the worst. I'm probably going to go Damian Harris. I have him ranked as an RB2 as well as does FTN's consensus. So it seems a little bit safer. Likely there's enough volume there. That game's probably going to be another meh primetime game. So for me, I'm going to go Damian Harris. I think you see a lot of running volume. Cooks still is a decent option, just a lot more variables there. So I'm going to go Damian Harris. Alexander Spearer on YouTube. Bandy or Carter if Keenan Allen doesn't play? I do have the inactives. I don't know. They a late window game? Where'd they go? Looks like my inactives window disappeared on me. So I would say Carter over Bandy if Keenan Allen doesn't play. I don't love either of them, and I don't know where my inactives went. Technology. All right, let's try and pull that back up. But yeah, I would go Carter over Bandy. I don't love obviously either of them. But I do think that Keenan Allen's been trending towards a playing. So I don't know if you'll have to worry about that. I know it's kind of more of a true game time decision. And yeah, so they're in the later window. So that's not out yet. But I mean, obviously you're going to have to play one of those because you're going to have that later window. I don't know if there's anybody else available in the later window games on your waiver wire other than those two. A guy that I would probably say would be maybe Mac Hollins. Maybe somebody dropped Mac Hollins. If Renfro doesn't play, Mac Hollins is interesting. Again, in Denver as well. I mean, I don't know if Dolchich was added. KJ Hamler's a little bit interesting because I think Cortland Sutton gets a little bit more bracket coverage. Trying to think if there's anybody else out there that would be a decent option in that later window. I don't know if you want to maybe take a look at your waiver wire, drop some names in here. I can kind of give you an option. I don't really love Bandy or Carter. I don't think they're going to give you a ton of upside. I mean, they're going to get you some points. I just don't really love it. Yeah, I think you just see a lot of Eckler and Mike Williams. So, yeah. Why don't you see if there's somebody else out there? But I Carter, if I'm picking between those two. Pacheco or J-Rob for Jameson on YouTube. I'm going to say here, rest of the season would be probably Pacheco. It kind of seems like, again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of an upward trend for Isaiah Pacheco, where J-Rob's kind of sitting in this kind of like a middling up and down. He's had some good ones, some bad. Kind of seems like a lot of up and down there, but I think the Chiefs are a little bit more explosive. If Pacheco comes out and has a real good week and can take over that role, and you see Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of see just some pass catching and Wells McKinnon's sprinkled in there where Pacheco kind of sees 50% of the work. That's going to be very productive for fantasy, especially on a very explosive Chiefs offense. So for me, I think Pacheco is a better option rest of the season than James Robinson for you, Jameson. Stefano, thank you. It is it's all right. You know, apparently it's like a injury background. It just seems like all these guys keep getting hurt. So if you see a player that you like on there, it's probably not a good thing. Jets helmets, no. Bills fan, hat, helmets, no. Jets, no. Although, you know, Jets are doing some good things. So Stefano, not bad. Maybe I'll add one. Maybe a Garrett Wilson jersey or something. Not a helmet though. Alexander, yeah. Mac Hollins, he's interesting. He's not overly productive. I just feel like there's a little bit more opportunity there for him over like a Carter or a Bandy. So should I start Jamal Williams from Bob or Alec Pierce or Brian Robinson in my flex? So I'm going to go ahead. So Jamal Williams is interesting. He obviously is drawing the bulk of the workload again with DeAndre Swift out. Dallas is a pretty stout run defense. However, the offensive line is no joke there in Detroit, so I'm not totally worried about that. So for me, Jamal Williams is still a nice start. Obviously, Alec Pierce is going to be the lack here. So Pierce is definitely not even in the question. It'd be between Williams and Robinson for me here. Pierce is interesting, but not over these two for me. So we've got Jamal Williams is 17 in the consensus at FTN. I have him at 18. So he leads the way. But Brian Robinson for me is at 21 and consensus is 25. So he's literally right there. We're talking a couple different points there. So if you like the matchup a little bit better, which it is easier for Brian Robinson, and you think he sees enough workload, Brian Robinson, but Jamal Williams, I think, is the start there. But like I said, kind of a coin flip. MLB Dream, Fire. I hope there's not a fire. I'd have to get out of here. What do you think of Pittman rest of season half PPR? Justin, Michael Pittman. I think he just kind of isn't what we hoped. I thought coming into the season we were going to get an easy plug and play top 12 guy. I think he's a little bit more matchup based, and it's largely just because of the Colts offense, but it's definitely made a turn for towards an upswing there. Michael Pittman, we saw it last week, had a better game than we've seen all season. And he's kind of trending that direction. I think that whole Colts offense kind of has woken up. Once Jonathan Taylor gets back, that's going to be even better because they really thrive off of that play action a little bit more. And I think you saw it even, Dion Jackson got going and Pittman had a big week. Like it kind of just all goes together. So for me, I think Pittman is definitely obviously a startable option almost every week. I just don't think he's as safe as we thought he was going to be. So in some matchup based, you get a real good matchup like they had in Denver where you have like a Surtain or you get him up against a Gardner or Jair Alexander. Probably not the best option to start. But he's fine. I just think that he's just not exactly what we were hoping he was going to be this year. Projection from Chris Meany for Pacheco. I think he's going to be in that. I'm going to say 10 to 15 point range. I don't see him seeing a lot of the passing work. I know he's starting, but I think they maybe pass a little bit more to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think that's their goal here. I think that Pacheco's going to handle the groundwork, which isn't overly productive for fantasy unless you find the end zone. We see it with Nick Chubb on the constant on the high end. Nick Chubb's produces a lot of yardage and does really well in the run game. One of the best pure runners in the game. He doesn't see a lot of passing work. So if you're in a PPR or a half point type situation, he doesn't get you that high end ceiling most times unless he finds the end zone 2 or 3 times. So Pacheco, I think the safe play is like 10 to 15. I just don't think he sees the receiving work that we're probably expecting. I don't think the starter role is, hey, I'm getting 60, 70%. I think you still see Clyde Edwards-Helaire involved enough, especially in the passing game, that kind of limits Pacheco's like upside as far as like a PPR half point kind of situation goes. So I think 10 to 15 seems about right. I think he does end up finding the end zone once today. So that's an easy 6 points there in most scoring formats. So 10 to 15 seems safe. Do I start Hayden Hurst or Dalton? So, Bob, I am on Hayden Hurst this week. So when it comes to tight ends, for me, the tight ends, it's very matchup based. A lot of these tight ends outside of your top ones are just kind of, they find the end zone or they don't. And teams that are giving up a lot of points to tight ends right now are the Falcons and the Seahawks. Both have 5 tight end 1 weeks against them thus far this season in just 6 weeks. So additionally, the Falcons have 3 tight end 2 finishes against them, all in that same span. So they've had 8 tight ends finish inside the top 24. That's a lot considering how vast and like barren the tight end landscape is. So for me, Hayden Hurst is a full start. I really like him. Is he going to have you 20 points? Probably not. He's not going to give you that Jawan Johnson blow up, but I think he's definitely a tight end 1. Dalton Schultz, I know it's Detroit, and everybody's like, oh, Detroit, but they, again, a little bit softer 3 tight end 1 matchups against them. I just still think that Dak's thumb's not going to be 100%, and I think if they get up early, we're going to see a lot of Zeke and Tony Pollard, and you're just not going to see a ton of passing from them. So I'm in on Hayden Hurst. I just think the matchup's a little bit nicer, and Schultz has been very not meh. So Bob also has, do I start Hayden? Oh, same question. Yeah, Hayden Hurst. Abraham on YouTube, Curtis Samuel, Kareem Hunt, or CEH in my flex. So I'm going to lean Samuel. I think that Terry McLaurin draws Jair Alexander, which is going to leave Samuel likely a higher target, especially without, I think I did just see, hopefully it didn't close on me again, the inactives. Yeah, so the inactives are Washington Diami and Jahan Dotson and Logan Thomas all out for the Commanders. So I know they get Taylor Heineke, but he's proven to be a viable starter here and there, spot starter. So for me, I'm going to go Curtis Samuel here. I think it's going to be a better matchup. He's going to get the easier of the corners. So I'm going to take him. Kareem Hunt just seems a little bit too risky. NCH is another one that's a little risky. Both could have big games. It's just safer to me, I feel like, with Curtis Samuel, just by the way that I think the game scripts and everything's going to play out. Kale Sport on YouTube, tough spot for me this week. MT hurt. Brown and Jefferson on buys. Got to start two of these receivers. Mooney, Wandell, Corey Davis, 12-man PPR. So I'm going to say, so we've got Mooney has New England. So mentioned it earlier in the show. New England against wide receivers right now is not a situation that I want to mess with at all. Additionally, you're getting a Bears offense that's looked a little better, but has been very atrocious thus far this season. So although the Patriots have given up 6 wide receiver 2 finishes, they have no wide receiver 1 finishes against them yet. And they've only had 5 wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 finishes combined. So not overly a ton of points against them. So you're looking at most likely a wide receiver 3-ish finish from Darnell Mooney. So Corey Davis is a guy I'm actually in on this week. Obviously, Elijah Moore not playing. But Garrett Wilson will draw Patrick Surtain. We saw Alec Pierce have a big game against the Denver defense when Indy was up against them on Thursday night when Surtain covered Pittman. So for me, I think Corey Davis has a good chance to have a pretty big game this week. So I'm going to go with Corey Davis, and I'm going to shoot it with Wandell. I feel like he's kind of becoming the guy there in New York. Pretty open depth chart there. And I think Wandell could see the usage. They drafted him. They brought him in. Brian Dable has interesting ways to get balls in the hands of his playmakers. So offense looks pretty good so far. So I'm going to go with Wandell. I just think it's a little bit better offense, better situation for him. He seems like a guy that they really want to get involved. Blade 214, I think that's how you'd say that, on YouTube. What's up? 2 questions, full PPR. 1, Judy or Reynolds. 2, ETN, Brian Robinson, Mozart, and Damian Harris. Okay, so let's start with the first one. We're going to go with your wide receivers there, Judy or Josh Reynolds. I actually like Jerry Judy this week for the same reason I kind of just mentioned up there with Corey Davis. Sauce Gardner's been really good against wide receivers. He likely is going to shadow Cortland Sutton, who's been the best receiver there in Denver. So Judy likely sees a decent target share. And Brett Rippon, I know there was a tweet that the Jets put out there. Rippon has a pretty good rapport with Judy. He hit a deep bomb for him last time they played the Jets. And he was the quarterback. So for me, I like Judy this week. I have him as a top 24 option. Our consensus rankings over at FTN have him at, sorry, I got to scroll a little bit, have him at 30. So the rest of the crew is a little bit less way down on him. I actually have him the highest at 24. So the rest of the crew doesn't necessarily agree with me, but I kind of have a feeling that it could be a Jerry Judy day. As far as your 2 running backs go, Damian Harris is a guy that we all have ranked pretty high. So I'm going to go with Damian Harris. My next option is actually going to be Brian Robinson. He has a good matchup against the Packers. The Packers, I had mentioned earlier in the show, have a lot of points against them on the ground. They actually have allowed, They've allowed 7 top 24 options. Majority of them have been running back 2s with 5. So you're not expecting a ton, but I do think that he's a pretty safe top 24 option there from Brian Robinson. I think he finds the end zone. I think Taylor Heineke kind of keeps them in this game a little bit more than the Packers hope. So I'm going to go Robinson and Damian Harris there. Stacy, you are welcome. Hope it works out for you. Spencer Butler on YouTube. Brandon Ayuk or Alec Pierce? Oof, this is a good one. So I'm going to go Brandon Ayuk here. I think that this matchup that the 49ers have is obviously against the Chiefs, and it's going to be most likely a decent amount of points scored. Brandon Ayuk has proven to be the guy that it seems like Jimmy Garoppolo trusts a little bit more. I wouldn't say even trust more, but they target him. Brandon Ayuk saw the 2 touchdowns last week. Deebo Samuel sees his share. Kittle, CMC's not going to get a ton of work, I think, in the beginning of this game. So I don't think that Ayuk necessarily this week gets hindered from CMC's addition. It might even help him open up that field a little bit more with a better running back. So for me, I like Ayuk. Alec Pierce is interesting. I still think he has a good day, but I think the upside is much higher for Brandon Ayuk this week against the Chiefs in what should be a much higher scoring game. Justin on YouTube, Hill or Goddard rest of season half PPR. If that's Taysom Hill, I'm definitely going Dallas Goddard. I know Taysom Hill is on a tear right now, but it's very heavily touchdown dependent. We saw it last year with Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox had a ton of touchdowns, and then this year's just kind of evaporated. And Taysom Hill's done this in the past too. It's hard to argue against him right now. But even on Thursday night, I mean, he got, I think, was 10 points. Let's see, where's my window? Yeah, I think it was 10 points that he had in PPR scoring formats, and that was with a touchdown. Which is not very good considering most touchdowns are 6 points in scoring formats. So it's not like Taysom Hill's really this running away yet. 10.1. So he had 1 target, 1 reception, 3 yards, 3 rushes for 9 yards. And he went 2 for 2 in passing. So, I mean, yeah, he's very gadgety. He has a lot of options and a lot of ways to score points. But I mean, you're talking a total of 2, 3, 5, 7, 6 touches in a game. That's not a guy that I'm dropping for Dallas Goddard, who is a pretty integral part of that Philadelphia offense. A little bit, yeah. So I'm definitely still going with Dallas Goddard over Taysom Hill. Let's scroll on back over to Twitter here. Looks like our questions are over on YouTube. Let's see what we got here. Let's see what we got. So we got Brandon Ayuk against KC, McLaurin against Green Bay, Daniel Gregory on Twitter. That's easily for me. That's a Brandon Ayuk. Again, I think you're just going to see the McLaurin against Jair Alexander, which I just don't want anything to do with Taylor Heineke, especially at quarterback. So, yeah, that's pretty easy for me there with that one. Let's see here. We got Bob has another question on YouTube. Bob Johnson. Should I start Jamal Williams, Dalton Schultz, or Brian Robinson in flex? So I'm going to go Jamal Williams here. I know it's a little bit tougher matchup. It's Dallas's defense. The front 4, front 7's pretty good. But that Detroit offensive line is very good. So I trust them to get him at least some decent running lanes. I think that Jamal Williams has the ability to find the end zone. You can pass against this Dallas defense, and I think that this game, although Dallas, I think, gets kind of ahead in it a little bit, I think that you're going to see enough early on that Jamal Williams will be able to find the end zone. I think he finishes well within the RB2 ranks, a little bit higher than Brian Robinson. Both of them I have as RB2s. So if you really want to go with Brian Robinson over Williams because you like the matchup better, which is a little bit softer with the Packers, because like I mentioned earlier, they've offered 7 running back, top 36 running backs Packers have allowed. So Brian Robinson is getting that soft of a defense. If you like him a little bit better, don't hate the play. But personally for me, I have Jamal Williams slightly ahead of Brian Robinson. And Dalton Schultz, I'm not looking to flex a tight end when I have these other 2 options. Just because the tight end position has been so very vital, and Dalton Schultz hasn't done anything for me yet this season to prove that, hey, he deserves to start over these 2 other running backs that have a better chance of finding the end zone, in my opinion. Hopefully that helps you, Bob. All right. Back to Twitter. Let's see here what we got. We've got Gerald Everett or Dalton Schultz from Good Vibes. I'm going with Everett against the Seahawks. I mentioned it earlier. Top tight end 1 finishes this season. The Seahawks and the Falcons are tied with giving up 5. So I am in on Gerald Everett this week. Large part just because of the matchup, and I feel like that's where tight ends go. And I think he's been productive enough. He's seen enough targets. Gerald Everett's average tight end finish thus far this season has been the tight end. He has an average finish. Where's his name? Can't find him. 11. So he's 11.8, which is actually the 9th highest tight end average finish on the season. So I'm in on it. Easy plus matchup. I'm in on Gerald Everett there. We got, can you give a shout out for Abraham? We are freezing. There. Okay. Sorry. Computer is not working. Abraham, would you consider trading Aaron Jones for Najee Harris? Aaron Jones for Najee Harris. No. Abraham, I would say keep Aaron Jones. I think that Najee Harris is not overly productive. His numbers below surface level have always been pretty bad. His efficiency's been pretty low, yards per carry. He was very buoyed by some receiving numbers that he's not going to see anymore. A lot of checkdowns, a lot of stuff like that. So he's very meh. I think better days are ahead for Aaron Jones. I think once this Packers offense kind of starts to figure it out, and we might even see it this week. This Commanders offense or defense has given up a lot of points to running backs in PPR formats. So I'm holding Aaron Jones personally. But I'm not a big guy. I didn't really love. I liked. I'm not saying Najee Harris is a bad running back. I've never been a huge I love Najee Harris type of guy. So for me, I'm holding Aaron Jones. I think that he's the better option there the rest of the season. And even honestly in a dynasty format, I still like Aaron Jones a little bit better. So Craig Reynolds or Njoku at flex. I am going to go with David Njoku here. I know Craig Reynolds might see a decent amount of work. But again, it's that situation of who sees a lot, and it's a tough Dallas defense. I'm not saying they're an easy defense, but the offensive line in Dallas is pretty good, Alex. But I think Njoku is the guy. Baltimore's also been pretty against tight ends. They give up some points, not a ton, but they're not a terrible matchup. And Brissett's been targeting Njoku, especially in the red zone. So I'm going to go with David Njoku. I have him as a top 12 tight end this week. So for me, it's an easy flex over Craig Reynolds, who likely only maybe gets you 8 points. So yeah, I'm going to go Njoku there, Alex. Max on YouTube, Jamal Williams or David Montgomery full PPR. So I am going to say Jamal Williams. I have Jamal Williams as my RB 18 right now, where I have David Montgomery at 22. The consensus at FTN has Jamal at 17 and David Montgomery at 20. So both me and our FTN consensus rakers lean Jamal Williams. I think that kind of piggybacking off of Alex with Craig Reynolds, I think that there's enough volume here for Jamal Williams to see some good production. I think that offensive line's good enough to get him some yardage, possibly find the end zone. I think with Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back, the passing offense will be a little bit better here for the Lions, and Dallas can be thrown on. So I think game script and everything, I think Jamal Williams has a better chance at finding the end zone. David Montgomery, that's going to be kind of a messy game against New England, which isn't overly great. Also, they're kind of playing the hot hand there, and Chicago, they mentioned that all week. So Khalil Herbert could obviously easily lead this backfield on Monday night. So I'm going to go Jamal Williams in this situation. Lee, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking me. Carnitas versus El Pastor, game time. Not 100% sure, Lee. Maybe clarify it for me. I'm confused. But flow of 60 FPS on YouTube, Ismail or CPCMC. I'm not sure who you're talking about as far as Ismail goes. I may be a little bit confused. But most likely CMC. Then Deontay, Foreman, Chuba Hubbard, or Raheem Mostert. I'm going to go Mostert here in PPR. Foreman and Hubbard both draw Tampa Bay. They've only allowed 3 top 36 running backs. So for me, I'm avoiding the Carolina backfield also until we kind of see what it exactly looks like. And I think Raheem Mostert has a pretty good matchup this week. Miami. Yeah, I like Raheem Mostert. Their matchup against, I believe it is Baltimore. Am I right there? No, Pittsburgh. They get Pittsburgh, which is even better. Pittsburgh actually has been allowing a decent amount of points to running backs, especially in PPR formats. They have allowed 4 RB1 finishes, 2 RB3s, and 1 RB2. So that's 7 total top 36 options all season. So Mostert's actually a pretty good start. We have him ranked as far as overall consensus as 19. So we have him within the RB2 finish range there for Mostert, where Foreman and Hubbard are both more running back 3 options for both the consensus and myself. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Let's roll into Twitter here, see if we got any more questions there. Let's see here. We got Daniel Gregory on Twitter, PPR Flex, Josh Reynolds, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Carter, Noah Brown. I'm gonna hold out here for Keenan Allen. Obviously Dallas and Detroit game is that an early game? I think it's an early game. Dallas and Detroit is an early game, so obviously you'd have to start one of them ahead of Keenan Allen. So I'm going to go Keenan Allen. If he doesn't play, go DeAndre Carter there. Just because Keenan Allen's upside, I think, is significantly higher than the rest of these guys mentioned here. And I know he's leaning towards possibly playing. So I'm going to go Keenan Allen. And then you obviously pivot to Carter if Keenan Allen doesn't play. That's the route I would go there, Daniel. All righty. Let's see what else we got on here for Twitter questions. So we got that one. Chris Godwin from Good Vibes on Twitter. Chris Godwin versus the Panthers or Amon-Ra St. Brown. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of Chris Godwin. Talking like 2 spots. It's like 8 and 10. So not a huge difference. Not a lot of PPR points difference there. But I lean Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he just sees a little bit bigger target share. I think that easily he could find the end zone, and probably what's going to be a game that they might be playing from behind in. So I'm going Amon-Ra, although it's very close. So where I would go. Justin on YouTube, is Tampa's defense worth the keep? I already have Tom Brady and Godwin and Gage on the bench. I would say so. Tampa's defense has been pretty good. But I mean, I feel like the having Brady and Godwin engaged doesn't really affect the defensive side of the ball. But Tampa's defense has been pretty good. I mean, I don't think that they're overly fantasy relevant, but they're a tough defense. So for me, I would hold on to Tampa. I mean, I guess it depends on who else is in your waiver wire there. Let's see what else we got here. I don't know if we have any other questions thus far on here. Let's check Twitter. I don't see much here. So let's Well, we wait for some more questions here. Let's go over the inactive list. Let's see what we got. Anything interesting here? Let's see. Jace Horn for Carolina is a big deal. On the defensive side of the ball, that kind of gives you a little bit of a bump there for the Chris Godwins and the Mike Evans, Russell Gage type players. Jace Horn, that's just going to kind of push everybody up one additional spot and opening up the windows there. That's interesting. Outside of that, let's see here. Cincinnati, nothing of note. Cleveland, nothing of note. Outside of maybe Wyatt Teller, missing 3 linemen, and Denzel Ward at corner. So Atlanta could be an interesting game. I think Atlanta will be able to, or Baltimore will be able to possibly run on these guys. Cleveland, that should be an interesting game, especially with those inactives. Let's see what we got here. Dallas, nothing of note, really. Lions, obviously, DeAndre Swift is out. So that is opening up that window for the Jamal Williams start. Let's see here. Green Bay, Christian Watson is out. That's just another. David Bakhtiari's out. That's kind of a big deal, especially against the Washington front four. It hasn't been overly productive, but that could be a thing to watch today. Let's see here. Indy, nothing really of a ton. No, Shaquille Leonard is out. That's kind of big for Tennessee. You could see a little bit there out of maybe the rookie tight end, Chig Okawanu, and possibly see a pretty big game there out of Henry. Shaquille Leonard's pretty big for that interior line there, as well as Kwity Paye, who's out again. So could see some good things there in the middle there for Tennessee. We got another question here from Twitter, Big Boy Bugatti. Full PPR pick to Christian Kirk, Alec Pierce, or Cortland Sutton. Alec Pierce for me is the top guy on this list. I like his matchup against Tennessee, against Tennessee. I think that's going to be a good matchup for him. Christian Kirk and Cortland Sutton. I'm going to actually take Christian Kirk here. Cortland Sutton, I am very low on. The consensus at FTN has this Sutton over Kirk. So if you want to go with those guys, our overall consensus is Sutton, but I personally am leaning Kirk. I just think Sutton draws Jair Alexander, and I don't think that you're going to see a lot. I don't think Rippon's going to try and test him, especially with that backup quarterback. If it was Russell Wilson, a little bit different story, but Brett Rippon, I don't see him or them saying, hey, throw the ball 5-6 times against Jair Alexander. So for me, I'm going to go Pierce and Kirk. All right, back to our inactives. Jamal Agnew, week 4 hero. He is inactive. Other than that, nothing of note in the Jaguars game there. The Saints, we had their game already. The Giants, let's see here. Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, both inactive. So Wan'Dale Robinson is pretty interesting. Definitely more interesting with Toney and Galladay out. Like I said, pretty open window there for Wan'Dale Robinson. So not a bad option to kind of toss in there as a flex option, a high upside type guy. Big Booty Bugatti Word are on the same page with fading Sutton. Also love the value at Pierce anytime touchdown plus 340. I agree. I really like Pierce this week. I mean, he's gotten more and more involved. We've seen double-digit touchdown or double-digit PPR points each week. And like you said, the tough thing with the touchdowns is that for some reason they like to get in the red zone and they like to throw to one of the 3 tight ends. So that's the only concerning thing there. But I think that's a pretty good prop. It's not great. But I could see it. Like I said, the Titans are an easy matchup, and he's gotten more and more involved every week. So I don't hate it. For the Titans in that same matchup, looks like Kyle Phillips is out. Not a guy that we're really looking to start. It's probably the biggest issue. Zach Cunningham at linebacker, that could open up some for Jonathan Taylor and the Colts run game. But not overly meh. Commanders, that's a big one. Diami Brown and Jahan Dotson are both out, as well as Logan Thomas. That kind of opens up that window for Curtis Samuel, I think. Could see some for Cam Sims. John Bates, obviously, is now active. He's a decent tight end stream if you're really desperate. But I kind of feel like this could be a Samuel. Even Gibson. Gibson might be interesting in this game. Just because I feel like they're not going to be able to use McLaurin a lot with Jair Alexander on him. And there's a lot of points the Packers have given up to running backs. So for me, I do kind of like Gibson a little bit as like a flex play. I'm not like overly excited to play him, but if you do roster him and you're stuck with these wide receivers, like bye weeks and stuff like that, where you're rolling out some pretty meh players, Gibson, I think, is pretty talented enough to be a guy that you could consider. I'm not overly, like I said, not overly trying to get him in my lineup, but I don't think he's as bad as some people would say he might be this week. Let's see here. We got one on Twitter. Nico Collins, Justice Hill, or Pacheco in flex. So here's where I'm at. I'm going to go with Pacheco. I mean, Nico Collins has been very okay, 8 points, 6 points, 10 points. Maybe he finds the end zone. But, like, the Raiders have been pretty good against the wide receivers this year. So I'm not overly excited to start really any of the wide receivers outside of Brandon Cooks maybe there. So I'm not sold on Nico Collins. So I'm honestly just going to leave Pacheco. I think that he has a clear shot. I mean, they obviously are giving him these workload. They're deemed him the starter. And at that, San Francisco has given up, 6 top 36 finishes to running backs. So for me, I'm going to go all in on Pacheco. I think that this game gets a little bit higher scoring. And I think that it's a decent start. I mean, it's better than Justice Hill would be the only one I would think about. But again, you're dealing with that more of a murkier situation in Baltimore with Davis and with Drake, and then Edwards now active and Hill. I feel like Pacheco kind of is on that upward trend where Justice Hill is kind of in there, but we're not going to really sure where he's coming in now, coming off injury. Gus Edwards off of injury. Drake had a big week, so does he see more work? So it's just a little bit more murkier there for me. I'm going to go Pacheco. Like I said, I think the upside is a little bit higher there, especially because it's the Chiefs and he could definitely find the end zone. Let's see what else we got here. Nothing else, it seems, on Twitter. So let's see. We ran through the inactives. Let's go ahead and pull up. Let's see here who we got. Let's see. Who do we got ranked a little bit higher than the consensus this week? Let's see here. So a couple players at the running back position or a little bit higher on than the consensus here at FTN. Nothing too crazy. Travis Etienne is a guy that we were a little bit higher on. We did have him ranked as our RB 21 right now, where the consensus has him at 25. So we're a little bit higher on Travis Etienne, another guy that's not overly excited to start, but he is a definitely startable option and someone that our FTN crew is a little bit higher on. We also have Jonathan Taylor is a guy that we're a little bit higher on. I just mentioned too that the Titans are missing some not key pieces, but some depth there at that linebacker position and could be a little bit easier to run against, considering that they are missing Zach Cunningham and some other pieces there. However, the Titans have been a little bit more stout. They've only allowed 4 running back top 36 finishes, but it is Jonathan Taylor we're talking about. So we have him at 8. The ECR's at 10. Nothing crazy. Again, just some couple points here or there. A guy that we're definitely lower on, Tyler Algier. Okay, Tyler Algier, the consensus has him as a high-end RB3. We have him more as a mid-level RB3. For me, I like Tyler Algier. I liked him coming out of school. He's a fairly productive back, but he hasn't done a lot in the absence of Cordero Patterson. Now, the Bengals have given up 7 top 36 finishes to running backs so far this season, so it's not unlikely that he produces a little bit of a higher game. But he's not a guy that I'm overly trying to get in my lineup because so far, even with the absence of Cordero Patterson, Tyler Algier currently has an average finish of RB 51. It's 51.67. He has yet to exceed the top 25. That's his highest finish, which was week 4. But his last 4 weeks, RB 58, 25, 56, and 41 headed into this game. So Tyler Algier is a guy that I'm not overly looking to start. And like I said, even our FTN crew has him a little bit lower, than the consensus does. McCaffrey's another guy, minuscule. We have a little bit lower. Kenneth Walker as well. But again, both starts, both within the top 15. Nothing crazy there. When we come to wide receivers, there was a little bit of difference. I'd mentioned him earlier. Jacoby Myers is a guy that we're definitely in on. We actually had him 9 spots higher than the ECR when I wrote the article. So that's a big difference there. Chris Godwin's another guy that we have a lot higher. We have him as a RB1, low-end RB1. The ECR has him as an RB2. Deontay Johnson, a guy that was in a lot of questions. Another guy we have 4 spots higher than ECR. So those are the big differences plus side for us at the wide receiver position in our consensus. So if those are any names that you're thinking about, just think about it that way. Like our whole crew over at FTN, which includes, Ratcliffe, Scott Spratt. We've got Meany over there. We've got a lot of guys, 5 guys, and our consensus has them that much higher. So, Jace from YouTube, Kenneth Walker or Ramondre Stevenson. Jace, Kenneth Walker, for me here. I have him as my RB. Where is it at here? Where's he at? RB8. That's the highest amongst the rest of the FTN crew, but our FTN crew has him at 12. Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris is playing tomorrow. So I think it's going to be still possibly an RB2 finish, just not that top 12 finish that we're hoping on Ramondre Stevenson. I think Kenneth Walker definitely has that upside as he does face a Chargers defense that is not overly great against the run. They've allowed 4 top 12 finishes. They've also allowed 10 total RB top 36 finishes. Sorry, that was really clustered. They've allowed 10 top 36 finishes to the running backs in PPR scoring. So there's a lot of points that funnel through that Chargers defense on the ground. So I'm definitely in on Kenneth Walker. I think he could have a big day tonight. So Walker over Stevenson. Dylan on YouTube. We got Dubes, Terry McLaurin, or Isaiah Pacheco. Non-PPR. Clarified here. I'm going to take Pacheco here, especially with a non-PPR, because you're really looking for touchdowns in non-PPR, and I think Pacheco has that chance to find the end zone. McLaurin's going to get Jair Alexander, which I don't love. He could still have a decent day. We've seen it before, but Jair Alexander's been pretty solid this year. On top of that, it's Taylor Heineke, so I'm not overly excited that they're going to probably target him a lot. I think they see a lot to Curtis Samuel, Gibson, McKissick. They're going to kind of funnel through that shorter, a little bit quick and out type game. Romeo Dubes is interesting. I just don't – he sees a decent amount of volume, just doesn't really find the end zone. So it seems like they tend to Lazard a little bit more there. So I'm going to take Pacheco, who I think obviously is going to be the more heavier groundwork. So if they get into that red zone, I think you could see him find the end zone for you. So I'd go Pacheco there. Max on YouTube, Zay Jones or Hayden Hurst, or any waiver wire pickups you would suggest over both. I guess it depends on how deep your league is. So I don't know exactly who you have on your waiver wire. If you want to toss a couple names that you like that might be out there, that could maybe help. But in this situation, I'm going to actually go Hayden Hurst. I had mentioned it earlier. The Falcons are very, very easy to tight ends. They've allowed 5 tight end ones and 3 tight end twos. So that's 8 tight ends finishing in the top 24 thus far this season. So there's a lot of an opportunity there for Hayden Hurst to see a decent game. So I'm going to go with him. I just think that he's going to have a big game. I think he might even find the end zone this week. Keegan Jones on YouTube. Pierce, Breece Hall, or Ken Walker in the flex. I would definitely start Breece. I'd mentioned it earlier. Currently, through the first 6 weeks of the season, the average finish for Breece Hall is the 5th highest amongst all NFL running backs. He is 14.33 in PPR formats. He is only trailing Nick Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, Barkley, and Austin Eckler. So Breece Hall is a must start for me. And then I really like Kenneth Walker too. So I don't know if there's a way to get him into your lineup. I don't know exactly what your lineup looks like, Keegan. But Breece Hall is a must start. And then if there's a way to get Kenneth Walker in there, I don't know who you have else starting at running back. I would try to do that as well. All righty. Let's pop on over to YouTube. Looks like we got maybe a question or two here. Nope. We got no questions there. So back. So let's take a look here now at some wide receivers that we at FTN don't necessarily love as much as the consensus does. Mike Williams is a guy. So we have Mike Williams at 15 in the consensus. The ECR has him at 10. Especially if Keenan Allen plays. I'm not totally in on Mike Williams. We've seen it. He's kind of a very boomer bust type player. So Mike Williams, 5 spots lower from the FTN than the ECR. Brandon Ayuk is another guy that we are a little bit lower on, 4 spots. ECR has him as 21. We have him at 25. But I can see a little bit of a path for Brandon Ayuk in this game. So I'm not saying don't start him here. Just something to note that we just don't necessarily like him as much as the consensus. 2 other guys that have been mentioned a lot today, Cortland Sutton, Terry McLaurin. Both or all of us at FTN have him 3 spots lower than the consensus, both him and McLaurin. So definitely things to note there with those guys. Keegan has Chubb and Kamara at running back. Okay. So you're just loaded. Humble brag, I can see. No, just joking. Yeah, I'd start Breece over Kenneth Walker in that situation. Both could have big games, but Breece has been very consistent. Walker obviously only has 1 start and was very good too. So, yeah, I mean, Kenneth Walker is the easier matchup. So, it could definitely see Kenneth Walker have a big day and outproduce Breece, but I just feel like Breece has been much more consistent, sees a little bit more. You might see a little bit more checkdowns against Denver. And especially without Elijah Moore, you might be even involved in more of a passing game. So especially if it's PPR, Breece. If it's standard, I would maybe entertain Kenneth Walker a little bit more. Alexander from YouTube. Hey, Jeremy, what is up? Need some help here in my Vampire League. Let's see what I can do for you. We got Dubes, Myers, Jamal Williams, Kenyan Drake, Alec Pierce, and Curtis Samuel. All right. Do I have to pick one? Who am I picking here? Need to start 3. Okay. So he's thinking Jamal, Dubes, and Myers. Yeah. I would almost start. Let's see. All right. So I definitely like Jamal Williams. I agree there. And Jacoby Myers. I would say me, along with the FTN crew, would kind of agree on those 2. The only one I kind of struggle with here would be Dubes. I do like him. Pretty good matchup. The Commanders have been pretty soft to wide receivers. But let's see. Dubes we got at 27 in our consensus. Alec Pierce is at 33. But I have Dubes and Pierce right back to back at 28 and 29. I do think Pierce's matchup's a little bit better. than Dubes. I also feel like Pierce has kind of given us back-to-back double-digit fantasy point weeks. Dubes is obviously involved too. I'm gonna. Okay, so the consensus says Dubes. I personally think I might actually go Pierce here, Alexander. But it's really a coin flip. I mean, if you like Dubes better, I like it. I don't hate it by any means. I just lean a little bit towards Alec Pierce here. So I don't know if that helps you, but I like Myers and Williams as a lock, and then personally I'd go Pierce. But like I said, Dubes is the consensus at FTN. It would be Romeo Dubes. So if that helps you. All right, let's see here. Any more on Twitter? Nothing on Twitter. Let's see here. All right, let's take a look at tight ends. Tight ends, it's been pretty even here for FTN as well as the consensus goes. Things to note: Freiermuth and Everett both are 3 spots higher. We have Everett at 6, the ECR is at 9. Freiermuth 10, the ECR has Freiermuth outside the top 12 this week. So both options, probably both guys that most people are starting, especially with this bye week situation. Tunyon's the guy that we're a little bit lower on, -2, and Pitts, we are 1 spot lower than the ECR there. So we are 9 minutes away from lock here. So if you do have any last minute questions, feel free to hop in here and toss them in here. Hopefully we can get to them before you guys get your lineups locked in there. If not, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you tune in next week. Hopefully all the advice I gave helps you. That would be my hope. It's probably going to wear on me a little bit more than you guys because I tried to make sure that it's as accurate as it can be. Let's see here. Any other questions? Let's see here. I'm not seeing anything rolling in here. Let's see here. It seems like we're pretty much done. I don't see any questions coming in. So with that, we got one. Look at that, just in time. We got Limehead from Twitch, sit 1 of Debo, Evans, Tyreek, Jamal Williams, JT, and Kenneth Walker. Talk about a lineup. Jamal Williams. I'm going to sit Jamal Williams in this situation. Debo's upside against Atlanta is too good. Mike Evans against Carolina, I really like that matchup. Tyreek Hill, especially against Pittsburgh, or Tyreek Hill with Tua back and against Pittsburgh's a big one. I think that Tyreek Hill has a chance to be the top wide receiver this week. JT, I think, against Tennessee should be a good one. I know that ankle's a little bit concerning, but a little bit softer matchup than Jamal Williams against Dallas. And Kenneth Walker has a prime matchup against the Chargers. So, yep, Jamal Williams for me. You are welcome, Limehead. Let's see if we get any more lingering ones. If not, we are close to lock. Hopefully everybody has a good week. And hopefully we all get a win. Outside of that, just going to kind of hang out here, see if we get any last minute questions. Let's see. Keep on refreshing Twitter to see if we get anything in there. Let's see here. Nothing. All right, we got one here from Gitz. From YouTube, Foreman or Latavius Murray? I'm going to take Latavius Murray here. Foreman against Tampa Bay is not anything I really want to mess with this week. Also, Chuba Hubbard is technically listed as their starter on the depth chart for this week, so we could see more Hubbard than Foreman, possibly. I guess it really depends on how that all shakes out, but I'm going to take Latavius Murray, who seemed like he had that role pretty locked up, at least last week. Both have tough matchups, not great. But I'm going to take Latavius Murray grits. EJ Music, YouTube, Geno or Tua PPR? I like Tua. It's real close, but I'm going to take Tua there over Geno. I just think, obviously, if he's playing, he's healthy. Better weapons for him. Personally, I think easier matchup as well. Pick one: Michael Carter, Latavius Murray, or Chase Edmonds as a replacement to DeAndre Swift. I'm going to take Latavius Murray. I think his role is a little bit larger and a little bit easier of a matchup. Michael Carter against Denver, not going to like it. I'd rather take Murray against the Jets there. And Chase Edmonds has just been so hard to start. It's kind of been Mostert's backfield. So I'm going to take Latavius Murray. I think he has the chance to see the biggest amount of work than these other two. All right. Go that route. Let's see here. We are now 4 minutes away from lineup lock. Let's see if anybody else rolls in here in the last couple minutes. Let's see. Anything on Twitter here? Does not seem like we have much on Twitter. All right. Seems like we have finished up our questions here. All right. And with that, remember, if you aren't a subscriber to FTN at the moment, you can use the promo code POPE, P-O-P-E. Saves 20% off of your subscription. You will have full access to rankings, articles, etc. from all of the crew. That includes Jeff Radcliffe, Tyler Lochner, Adam Pfeiffer, Scott Spratt, Chris Meany, and others, as well as myself. So yeah, feel free to sign up for that. If not, it has been a pleasure to be with you for the last 2 hours, and I will be back next week, possibly an hour earlier, possibly the same time, possibly a guest. We'll just leave it open to that. Other than that, best of luck. Lineup lock is right around the corner. Get those last changes in. Let's go get some wins. Till next time. See you guys.